that the future of sex has nothing to do with technology and everything to do with humanity. The future of sex is about this shame-free, judgment-free, taboo-free culture and conversation that really comes back to the essence of expression as humans. It's our most core, pure state, is like how we move in the world is our sexuality. Technology is the vehicle. And so in the future, technology will be able to do wonderful things to help us express ourselves more.
Bryony Cole, c'est la référence mondiale de la SexTech. Voilà, que vous dire de plus à part que je rêvais de l'interroger et que son parcours m'inspire beaucoup. À partir de son podcast The Future of Sex, elle a créé toute son activité de consultante et de conférencière, puis maintenant la SexTech School, la seule formation au monde qui vous apprend à entreprendre dans le milieu de la SexTech. Cet épisode est exceptionnellement en anglais, donc désolé d'avance pour mon super accent. Il sera disponible en version sous-titrée sur YouTube et peut-être bientôt en version française en podcast. Bref, bonne écoute. Okay, so it started. Yeah. So thank you so much for accepting this invitation. And I'm sorry first for my English and my French accent, of course.
I love it.
So, I'm super happy you accepted this invitation because I began like 2 years ago, even a bit more, to be more interested in sexuality in general, in feminism. Of course, it started from here. And then entrepreneurship. And then I was just thinking, if I want to build my own company, why not in sexual field and what's happening in France and Europe? And I began some researches and I was a bit disappointed. And then, I just began a lot of researches. And then in this year, for the first lockdown, I took the opportunity of this lockdown to begin a podcast about entrepreneurs in sexual industry in France first. And then I was like, okay, I need to ask to other people. And I found what you do thanks to Christelle Bonny, who was one of the first entrepreneurs in France in SexTech.
Yeah.
And SexTech, even now, is still a bit confused for me. Like, it's so hard to define to people who are not into this, like, what it is. So I was like, okay, let's ask to the best people for that. So I wanted to ask you, and I also subscribe to SexTech School, so I wanted to maybe to talk about it. First I have some questions just before SexTech. Okay, just before SexTech and before you began your podcast, Future of Sex, who are you, Bryony? Why are you doing this now? How everything began?
Yeah, so I never set out to work in the sex tech industry. Of course, I didn't even know what sex tech was when I was younger. But one thing that I definitely didn't get a good education in was sex and sexuality. When I was younger, I feel like I had a fairly common experience to most people in that it was okay. It was very average, but it wasn't an education that taught me much about being a woman, what it's like to live in a woman's body, how you physically develop, and how that impacts the way people see you. And so at the time when I was young, let's say 12 or 13, I developed early, but mentally I didn't understand why people were looking at me differently. I didn't understand what it meant, to have any sexual expression. And of course, the school system was sadly lacking. And I felt like throughout high school, I always was told to be small, especially as a woman. Now, whether you're small in frame or small in terms of your voice, don't speak up. There were all these sort of coded messages about staying small in order to fit in and to create more space for men and to be quiet. And, the other part of that was in relationships. I got no education, so I didn't really understand what makes a relationship great and what makes sex great. And a lot of those things are the same, right? Communication, empathy, listening. And you may be wondering, why is someone that's in sex tech and talking about the future of sex just talking about sex, without the technology? Where are all the robots? But I think that at its core, sex tech is about sexuality and our humanity and how we understand each other. In fact, the technology is really just the vehicle. So that was how I got this interest. By the time I turned 30, I realized, oh my gosh, like, I don't really understand my own sexuality or what it's like to be a woman. And by that time, I had a career that was firmly based in technology. I was working for, Microsoft and smaller startups in New York. And I felt like this was a really interesting time for me to explore a different career. And what I felt that I really wanted to explore in my personal life was understanding my sexuality and my womanhood and all those things that had sort of been suppressed for so long. And so that's really how I got into it. I had this idea to explore sex from a tech perspective, and I went and created a podcast, much like you are, and just interviewed people that, much like you are, know more about this topic in the space to really understand what's going on. And for me, what I discovered is no one really knows what's going on. And that, that sparked a whole new career for me, just trying to find out, well, what is actually happening and how can the problems I experienced when I was younger, how can we help that through technology today? So I hope that that's kind of like a long-winded answer, but it's the truth of the matter, I think.
Okay, so you began with the podcast, and you were keep on working while you began this.
I didn't. I really believed in the podcast at the time. I think I worked for a couple of months while I was doing the podcast, and then it got picked up as an interesting idea with this production company. So I quit my consulting job and thought, I'm going to do podcasting full time. Now, I don't think I'd recommend that if I had my time again, because in the end, I ended up walking dogs and, Airbnb being my place and doing all these other things just so I could keep doing this passion project. And I didn't really know if it was going to be successful or not. But on the other hand, it created this hustle inside of me. How do I grow the podcast quickly? How do I start to generate an income and a real career from this that, going from a salary at Microsoft to a dog walking salary was very different. And so there were a lot of adjustments just in my personal life I had to make. But in terms of a career, I just said yes to everything. So any speaking gigs, any events, any other interviews, I said yes, yes, yes. For 2 years, I said yes. And finally, at the end of that 2 years, after working on it, I developed a speaking career where I could charge good money and I could charge for the podcast and create much more income for myself and start to create interesting products in sex tech as well. So I opened a consultancy for that, and now we have a lab and now a school. But it definitely wasn't easy. And I think that's something that most people that get into sex tech share, is this personal passion that drives them to get into the industry and a willingness to sacrifice other things, that perhaps haven't even made them happy. Maybe that's a great salary or clothes or spending money in different ways. But I think when you're driven by a deep personal story, you kind of are willing to give that up in order to really make something happen for your own career as well as your personal life.
Yeah, you completely trusted in your project. So that's why finally you just keep on doing it. Okay. Yeah. That's great. So if you could just explain what is sex tech in general, what is it? Because of course, and especially in France, it's still viewed as like robots, VR, and pornography only. And even if I try to explain that it's just technology that help sexual wellness, kind of, not only that, but when I try to be with that, people are like, but no, it's not the same thing. We are talking about technology. So maybe we have to define again what is technology. So I don't know, how do you explain?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And you're right. Everyone thinks, so it's just robots, or it's just VR or something really advanced. But when we talk about technology, really technology is just a tool. It's a tool that's used to do things, to help us solve problems. A tool in that sense can be a pen, right? A pen can be a technology too, or, it's very simple things as well as very sophisticated things. But in our minds today, we think technology must mean an acronym like augmented reality, AR or VR or AI, but actually technology can be apps, it can be websites, it can be tools like toys or dildos. It can be very simple. And when we think about that in the context of sex tech, we also have to remember that sex tech isn't just about actually the physical act of sex. It's everything around that that's in that bucket of sexuality. So education, sex education, we started talking about, that's definitely an interesting way that technology can deliver sex ed through potentially virtual reality. But we see also today in 2020 an influx of apps that are aiming to help sex education all over the world and for adults and kids. And then things like health, assault reporting, human trafficking. How are we using technology to solve these issues or problems, challenges in sex? And that's where I think the term begins to broaden. So for me, the easiest way to do it is I draw two circles like a Venn diagram, and in one of them is sexuality and the other one is technology, and then everything that can fall into those two that falls in the middle. That's what sex tech is. And it is broad and it's very different and it's complex and problematic because it's so big.
Yeah, there is a mapping to do about all the kind of company you could build around this topic, because it can also be a new fabric for underwears, or it can be a lot of things, not only like computers and internet.
I think that's a great point. Like those fabrics that have, if we want to talk about advanced fabrics, like think about haptic technology, and haptic technology is, fitted with sensors. Imagine a t-shirt or a glove that's fitted with sensors that, mimics someone else touching you, but there's no one there. Those are the sorts of sex tech innovations that are really interesting. How do we innovate using clothes and as you said, underwear that mimics a sense of touch? And that's a really exciting field of sex tech.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Then I have a better definition for everyone. I just need to translate. And there is something that a bit annoy me in France, in Europe, and currently, is that we are more and more talking about femtech, and that's great and amazing. But I have this feeling that VCs and people in startup ecosystem want to talk about femtech, and they want to hide sex tech in it. Because femtech is seen as something more about health and well-being, and they can just hide sex tech in it because sex tech would be a bit more dirty for them.
Yes, which goes back to. Yeah, that is something that I think is reflective of the culture and society that we're in, not just in France, but in the world. This is this happens in the US, it happens in Australia, where I'm from, because femtech seems more acceptable and more, has. And it's not true, but it's the way that society views the word sex. We think about sex and we think there's either something wrong with it, it's creepy, it's weird, it's sleazy, or it's a problem, a sexual problem, a health problem, And so we're very quick to put it into those two buckets of like porn or, premature ejaculation, health issues. But and so it gets buried. We can't say the word sex. And in fact, even, my company is Future of Sex, because it's like, okay, if we put something more legitimate in front of these two words in front, then people will be more open to listening to what I have to say because they think I'm a futurist. I'm not a futurist. I'm just a person that's interested in the present and the future of sex. So it is frustrating. And I think it's just points to the culture and society that we live in today. And perhaps in the future, sex tech will be more mainstream. And certainly since I started the podcast, I think it's become more mainstream. We see more media headlines about sex tech, but it's not the same as femtech.
Yeah, still not enough. Okay, and sorry, I will. I'm always comparing because, of course, I found many more resources in English and in the US, for example, but less in Europe and in France. So, do you have a point of view of the development of sex tech in Europe in general, and if you could compare with the rest of the world, or no?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think we're seeing really interesting education products in Europe right now, particularly out of Germany. There's
Yeah.
Beducated, Kama, which is an app for sexual wellness, just raised $3 million out of the UK.
Yeah,
So,
UK, Germany, and Holland. Hollander, I don't remember how we
yeah,
say in English. Yeah, they are on this topic, yes. But all the
yeah,
more Latin country, maybe a little bit less. But in another way, it's not Europe. But I saw that you are about to participate at Sex Tech in Brazil, the Sex Tech
mhm,
event in Brazil. So I was a bit surprised, and because they can be in some way very conservative and very Latin. So maybe like us in some countries in Europe. So yeah,
yeah.
why?
Yeah, so that's a really exciting area in Brazil. In fact, one of the students at SexTech school is part of this event in Brazil and invited me to speak. And this next class of SexTech school, I had 3 more people from Brazil apply. And so I think there is actually at the beginnings of a movement there. It's led by women or vulva owners, and they're really excited to have this discussion because it has been so taboo, especially for women. The conversation about sex has been hidden for so long. And so these women in Brazil are now trying to start this movement of sex tech there. We also have someone else in the class that's, Mexican, from Mexico, and she started trying to start, a whole movement in Latin America. And I think it's really important. These conversations are global, and because we live in a world where it's so connected now, we can connect to people across the world. And I have people in my school from Hong Kong, from Brazil, Mexico, US, Australia, all across the UK. And it's really interesting to see actually how similar the challenges are. And the biggest challenge is just talking about sex. The challenge isn't in the technology. It's actually in the cultures that we associate with sex.
Okay, so finally, we are not late or something like that. It's just that now it's the same problem everywhere for you.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, that's great. So can you no, because I always have this feeling that in technology we are always a bit late, or also about just these politic thoughts. I began Vibrator Nation, this book about feminist sex toy stores, and it's so inspiring. And I feel we are so late in France about this topic. Just the way you build the shop. So that's why I wanted to ask you that. But then, what will be sex tech school then?
Yeah, so Sex Tech School is at the moment it's a 6-week program where I take aspiring entrepreneurs, people that are interested in sex tech. They want to get a job with a sex tech company, or maybe they want to invest in a company. Maybe they have an idea, and we go through a program for 6 weeks together where they end up building something. It's like their first step into sex tech. So we take them through the industry knowledge, who to know, what companies to know, how do you map the industry, how do you take a, pulse of what's going on, what the conversations are, and teach them how to do the research side as well as the networks. Then go into brand building, because it's a different landscape in sex tech to other industries in terms of what you can and can't do in marketing and advertising. And of course, censorship on Instagram, we all know about, like the female nipple is banned, but there are so many other challenges, I think, for companies that want to get into this space, trying to advertise on social media platforms as well, even getting bank accounts. So there's industry sort of business challenges. And then we go into community engagement and look at how do we engage with the community at a local level and at a global level, and finish by looking through different business models, what's worked, what business model might work for your business or perhaps your next step in your career. So it's quite a comprehensive quick program, but it really gives you a sense of the industry, and also you have to build something. And I think that's one of the main things for me is I knew that when I stepped into the sex tech industry, if I didn't do something straight away, I would sit on it for 2 years and think about it. And my friends kept me accountable and pushed me to do something. But I think most people don't have someone that can keep them accountable or push them, every week and say, what's your weekly plan, and get out there, especially when it's a scary topic to talk about. People don't talk about this with their friends even. So when people join the class, they have mentors, they have accountability buddies, and they have that momentum there to really launch into the career and have the support in what can be a really scary step. Talking about sex publicly is actually scary because it's so taboo and because it carries reputational risk. If you work in another environment and then they find out, like, how are you going to approach that? How do you feel about that? So we go through all of that in the program, and we've seen so many different innovations already come out of the last 3 cohorts. So it's fun to connect with people from all over the world as part of this.
You already have 3 cohorts? I mean, you already began? Okay, I didn't know.
We're on our
I thought
4th
you
now.
Okay, great. I thought it was just now. Okay. So, and can I ask you in these 4 cohorts, is it mainly women who applied?
Yeah, it is. And you're right. I've kept it very secret. There's been no advertising of the course. I've just posted it on, maybe you saw it on LinkedIn or Twitter. Did very few promotions of it because I wanted it to really attract people that really were ready to go into sex tech right now and were like, yes, this is it, I see it, rather than have a more mainstream advertising. And there's no website. There's just a waiting list.
Yeah, there is just the landing page, but it's enough, because when we know what you've done so far, of course we're interested in. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, okay, I want to apply. Just let me think when I will apply. So I applied, of course. But yeah, but why is it mainly women?
You know what? I think
it's not only for sex school, but in general, in this industry. I know you already talked about that a lot, but
yeah, no, I think it's right. I mean, I think women are attracted to this industry because of the same reasons I was, because it's an opportunity to fulfill the need that we had for education and for self-expression, and knowing that we needed help at a time we didn't get it. So it's almost like this purpose that drives so many women and that go and seek that information. And so I think a lot of women connect with me, and so, yeah, when I put this out, people already know who I am and what I'm about. And I'm also supporting women, and women are also supporting me in this industry. It's very much driven by women, which I'm very happy about. We do have some men in the cohort, but there's also a highly personal touch where if someone's not right for the program, I don't let them in. And I kind of like that now, that I get that control to be able to say, you know what, I only want to work with really interesting, passionate people. And more I keep coming back to my mission and feeling like I think that is just for women, but we'll see.
Really?
That's not explicit, but like that's truly how I feel, is at my happiest is supporting other women.
Yeah, of course, but sex. But you don't think that sex tech is only for women, is it?
No, and I think that male sex tech is about to have a huge breakthrough moment. But for the past 5 years, women in sex tech have really driven innovation in the industry. They've been the ones that have had the most need to, right? Men, for sexual pleasure, they kind of, masturbation and orgasms come easily to them, and they're not really seekers of anything. We're talking like majorities here, but of any like more information than that. And I think women, because of our anatomy, have been left behind in so many ways. So needed to innovate around pleasure, were seekers, drove a mental health wellness movement. And part of that became about sexuality and expression. And so much of the really interesting innovations, I think, often come from female identifying humans,
Yeah,
but also non-binary people too. I think the problem has been that they haven't had access to capital or expertise to help them. But certainly they're the way more interesting communities to me than what's already been developed and led by men, which is typically like adult entertainment,
Yeah, it's true that in the men I already interviewed, yeah, it was not as innovative as other women I interview. But I talked with some other men recently, and they were also like looking for new type of information because they were tired of this performance, always, the performance speech. And they also wanted to know more about other source of pleasure, because of course we are always talking about pleasure with men because they have almost everything they need about health more than women. But for pleasure, because of all these cliche about prostatic pleasure, this kind of stuff for heterosexual men. This kind of topic, they also wanted to be part of the movement, and I was thinking that they also should be in sex tech evolution, maybe. I don't know how, but I would be a bit, disappointed if it's again only women who take this revolution.
Yeah, I think the time is coming closer, but we really need those men, you really, in technology or in any new products and services you're developing. My belief is you have to be someone that's going to use that product, at a really early stage, an innovative edge thing. You kind of have to be the person that tests on yourself and goes, I have a need, like I know that this is missing. So I feel like there's men there that realize sex education isn't right. As men, I don't understand my sexuality and no one's here. Like they are the ones that need to step up and create that sex tech for that community and that market. And I think it's coming. And I think that the innovations we see today are really exciting for men. It's just not mainstream yet. You can talk about what's the Yo, the sperm tracking app. So it's really, really impressive. It has it's around $50, and it is a little microscope. It essentially turns a smartphone into a microscope where you can measure your fertility as a man, which is actually a big indicator of a couple's fertility. So it turns your smartphone into a microscope where you can look at the motility or the speed of your swimmers. Then there's Mirari, which is another male-focused sex tech, which is a Band-Aid for your taint. It uses electrostimulation technology to help with PE. Then we have Onut, which is for heterosexual couples to reduce the depth of penetration. I mean, there is a lot out there. And in fact, WeVibe just released their Arcwave Ion, which takes technology from vulva vibrators, so the womanizer, actually not a vibrator, air suction technology, and took that air suction technology, which has been incredibly popular for vulva owners, people with clitorises, and put it into a male sex toy to do the same thing, this suction technology with the frenulum on the penis, and it's claiming to mimic the female orgasm. But what's really exciting is people are looking at sexual products for men and going, it's time to change. We need to innovate beyond just the fleshlight, the male masturbator that's, big and doesn't really, it's not like discreet and doesn't have like a design-led quality to it, where so many of the products for women do now. Like so many of the products look so beautiful and so interesting and sort of abstract objects. They're not trying to replicate a human's anatomy. And so I think we're going to see that next with men. But I think what needs to happen now, yes, there's interesting technologies, but we need men also, particularly cis men who are heterosexual, to come out and start speaking about it as women have done in order to gain more permission and acceptance for those. So men that are wondering, like, how is this relevant to me? How can I use sex tech?
Yeah. Okay. No, that's for sure. And I also wanted to ask you, because everything seems so easy for you, since the beginning to talk about sexuality. It seemed very natural for you. I didn't listen all your podcasts, but almost, I tried to listen some of the beginning, middle, and then the last about dolls, for example. And you're so comfortable with all these topics with all your guests. And I was wondering if during these almost 5 past years, what were your main issues or obstacles? If you could share some of them, like if one day you had something like make you feel like maybe you want to give up, and finally you didn't, of course.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many times I thought I'd give up. I think the main thing was I started the podcast thinking I would be anonymous. I thought podcast is only voice. No one will know who I am. I don't need to worry. And so I was quite naive in that way. And I also liked the medium of podcast because it was just my voice. And if I said something wrong, I could edit it and it didn't have to be, my face. And there was not so many things that I needed to worry about. So I think for me, starting out that way was naive and that was good. But the way I got better about talking about sex was really just, exposure to education and different people and having the conversation hundreds of times and going to take courses for sex therapy and understanding, different perspectives from the therapy world as well. So there's something about someone telling me, if you're still here in 2 years, when I first started the podcast, if you're still here in 2 years, you'll be fine. But most people drop off in the first 2 years of a new project that they're working on. And
it's not only about sexuality, it's for almost every entrepreneur.
We try. Okay. And, I recorded the first 14 episodes that you'll never hear. I put them up on SoundCloud. I didn't even know how to get them in the iTunes store and they sounded terrible, but you have to be prepared to sound terrible and to stuff up. And that I was totally down for that. And I just wanted to learn. And it was so beautiful because no one really knew me at that time. But as I grew, the main thing was money, I want to stay in this, but how do I keep earning money? And how do I keep earning money if I stay in this industry? One, because the industry is small and it's difficult to, get funding or get investment or find a job in this industry because there's only a handful of companies that are, making a ton of money. And secondly, if I want to work outside this industry, what about my reputation? What about the way people look at me if I go to a fintech firm? Are they going to employ me now? If they Google me, they find sex tech. So that sort of next 2 to 3 years was the hardest year because I wasn't yet established enough to earn a lot of money speaking, but I was established enough that if I tried to have a career anywhere else, people would find out what I do and politely decline. So I think that was the hardest moment for me, was going, okay. And I just, somehow created more content and believed so much in it. And I also had no other option, I felt like at that point, that I just kept going. And that was really a breakthrough moment for me when I got a grant. I applied for a grant with the Australian government and got this grant for 6 months to just go and explore. And I started creating these hackathon programs, these events, and that changed the course of, the trajectory of how fast I could grow the career. And
so the Australian government gave you a grant. So it's public fund about.
It was amazing.
Even if they knew about your project and your specialty, they were okay with that.
Yeah, it was,
Okay.
I was incredibly lucky. And I went to Queensland for 6 months and I lived there as part of like an innovation program. And I worked on sex tech, but I also worked on mentoring other people in the community that needed help with their entrepreneurship and their businesses. And it just gave me the freedom to have a breath and create and be supported and get like resources, like legal resources and all those things that have been missing when you're bootstrapping and trying to like just live week to week. So it was a really transformative period for me. And then I came out of that having done so many talks around the world. I was able to charge a premium for my speaking, and I'd also honed my craft. You know, I'd been speaking for 2 years on a podcast and doing all these media interviews. That changed as well. So it's really about stamina. You know, how long can you stay in the game and still believe in yourself and put food on the table and pay for your bills? And there's no shame, I think, in going part-time to begin with, and you know, finding unique ways to hustle. Whether
Okay.
that's walking dogs or bartending or whatever, you know, I think you've got
Yeah,
to
I
keep
do
yourself.
Japanese classes, so
What's that?
on the side, I do Japanese classes on the
Yeah,
side. So
perfect.
because I'm half Japanese, so and I just did that, and it's funny, and it give me money, so that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
to be prepared to do that. And that's like a very much a skill of sex tech entrepreneurs, is that they're willing to do different things, you know, to keep things going.
Yeah. Okay. So it's funny because for you, your main issue was more you with yourself about what you want in your life, how you manage with your money, your lifestyle. It was not the criticism from outside. It was just you and what
No,
I'm doing.
no, I don't think so. Maybe at the start it was. I was nervous, but um, the thing that changed my fear into, wow, this is amazing, was the feedback that I got from people that had listened to the podcast or come to an event that said, thank you. I can't talk to my family about this, or that, you know, really inspired me. It made me realize I wasn't alone, and the work I was doing was something that other people really wanted to be part of too. And yeah, that was so much louder than the criticisms, you know. I will say never read the YouTube comments. That's a advice to anyone that ends up on YouTube. Just don't read
Okay.
the comments because they're the worst internet trolls ever.
Never
But
read
other
that.
than that, yeah, you know, and of course my family, I think people whose families don't have an issue with this, they're very lucky. You know, my parents were not planning to have someone in their family talk openly about sex. And my parents are beautiful. They're creative, but they're somewhat conservative. And they were like, what are you doing? And I think that was more challenging for me to hear that from my parents than to hear it from someone on Twitter.
Of course. So sometimes I ask, like, what are the questions you don't want to answer anymore? Or maybe I also asked some of them. Or are you sometimes upset about some cliche you may have heard too many times? Or you're still super always enthusiastic and you're okay with all the questions?
I think when people confuse working in sex tech with sex work, or with the fact that they have access to talk to me about my own sexual experiences, I find that that is something that now I have no tolerance for, and I have boundaries set up. But previously, I think people felt like they had a license to say that, and I had to learn how to create those boundaries again, and not to bash men here, but in particular with men, you know, whether that was speaking at an event and men coming up afterwards and making comments about my appearance, or making sexually suggestive comments and things. I had to learn how to shut that down really quickly, because the assumption is if you work in sex tech, well, then you must love sex and you must want sex all the time and you're going to tell me about your sexual experiences. And people feel like they have a right to say whatever they want and ask whatever they want. And so for me, that's whether it's, I don't know if it's cliche really, but it's just the frustration I think that you face in this industry is people often misinterpret what you're working on and what you're available to answer for them.
Okay, great. So last question, and then I don't bother you anymore.
No, you're
or maybe
great.
just
Stop
at
it.
maybe just at the next cohort of SexTech school. But so finally, because this is the title of your podcast, what is the future of sex according to Bryony?
Yeah, so the future of sex has
I don't know, in 10 or 20 years out, as you want.
Okay. Here's my belief that the future of sex has nothing to do with technology and everything to do with humanity. The future of sex is about this shame-free, judgment-free, taboo-free culture and conversation that really comes back to the essence of expression as humans. It's our most core, pure state, is like how we move in the world is our sexuality. Technology is the vehicle. And so in the future, technology will be able to do wonderful things to help us express ourselves more. Maybe we'll be able to be holograms. Maybe we will turn ourselves into robots or part, cyborg or dolls. To me, that doesn't matter as much as the culture and the conversation that's going to change, because once that changes and people's minds open up, then we can create the most creative, fantastical experiences. Then we can, travel into different dimensions and have sex with the stars, and that sounds amazing. But if we don't get over the first hurdle of, solving at its root all the problems, assault, human trafficking, really everything that's wrong with sexuality today, the dark side comes back to education. And if we can solve that and the culture and the conversation, then I think the future of sex is really an exciting place, and we can all look forward to, an open, accessible, wonderful expression of ourselves. It's probably not what you're looking for.
Oh, but that's perfect. Thank you to end with it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bryony, for this, because it will be a great source of motivation also for me when I will have to edit it again.
Yeah.
And thank you. Yeah,
I'm so pleased.
Merci beaucoup d'avoir écouté ce premier épisode en anglais jusqu'au bout. J'espère qu'il vous aura autant intéressé que moi, voire motivé pour certains, certaines, à entreprendre ou continuer d'évoluer dans ce milieu fascinant qu'est la sextech. Car finalement, on parle plus d'humain, de relations humaines que de technologie. La technologie, peu importe sa forme, n'est qu'un outil de plus pour une sexualité toujours plus épanouissante et intéressante. Bref, comme d'habitude, toutes les références de cet épisode sont en description. Pour la version doublée en français, je vais voir comment faire, et si toi, auditeur ou auditrice, tu sais comment m'aider sur ce sujet, n'hésite pas à me contacter, ça pourrait beaucoup m'aider. En attendant, je vais enfin transférer tous les épisodes de Talk Podcast sur YouTube, donc il y aura au moins les sous-titres en français. Enfin, si vous avez aimé cet épisode ou les autres, ça serait super si vous pouviez le partager autour de vous et surtout vous abonner et mettre des petites étoiles sur Apple Podcast comme d'habitude. N'oubliez pas également de suivre le compte Instagram talk-univers. Merci encore et à très vite.